She could bully me off my own land with letters, complaints, and a smile that hid venom. At first, I tried to be the bigger person, waving politely, ignoring the snide remarks, and brushing off the endless accusations she threw from across the property line. But when she tried to starve out my animals and sabotage my livelihood, something in me snapped. I wasn't just going to sit back and let some self-appointed HOA queen run me into the ground. That's when I remembered something my grandfather once told me. If they don't respect your fence, give them something loud enough to remind them it's yours. So I did exactly that. I opened a fully legal gun range right on the border of her precious, silent community. She wanted control. What she got was the sound of freedom, ringing out every Saturday morning. She messed with the wrong rancher. Before all the chaos, my life on the ranch was everything I had ever dreamed of. Tucked just outside the city limits, my land stretched wide and open, bordered by rolling hills, tall grasses, and a sky that seemed to go on forever. The mornings were filled with the soft clucking of chickens and the low, comforting hum of my cattle grazing in the pastures. I'd wake up with the sun, pour myself a hot cup of coffee, and sit on the porch listening to the birds call out from the trees. There was a peace here that couldn't be bought, a kind of silence that settled into your bones and reminded you of who you were. No traffic, no sirens, no concrete walls, just me, the animals, and the land we called home. I wasn't some recluse hiding from society. I'd built a small business from my ranch, selling organic eggs, hosting horse riding lessons for local kids, and boarding a few retired animals for extra income. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it gave me everything I needed. Most days I didn't see another soul unless someone came by to drop off hay or pick up a dozen eggs. That solitude was a gift, not a burden. I respected my land, maintained my fences, and kept everything clean. The neighbors, few as they were, kept their distance, and I kept mine. It was a mutual, unspoken agreement of live and let live. I had no idea that the serenity I loved so much was about to be challenged by someone who couldn't stand the idea of other people living differently than she did. She didn't see beauty in the land. She saw a problem, and she made it her mission to fix what was never broken in the first place. The day she moved in, I knew things were going to change. Her SUV pulled up with a spotless trailer hitched behind it, followed by a moving truck driven by a pair of guys who looked more confused than anything else. Her house was technically within the boundaries of the newly expanded HOA development that had sprung up on the far edge of the valley, but my ranch sat just outside of that imaginary line. I wasn't under their rules, didn't pay their dues, and had no interest in their bylaws or manicured lawns. Still, that didn't stop her from acting like she ran the entire region the moment she set foot on her property. At first, she gave me that overly polite smile, the kind that stretches wide but never reaches the eyes. She introduced herself as Karen, though I never needed the name to know what kind of person she was. She asked questions that weren't really questions, more like judgments wearing a disguise. So, how long do you plan to keep the animals? Do you use any pesticides? Have you thought about painting the barn something less red? I laughed it off at first, figuring she just needed time to adjust to country life. But it quickly became clear she wasn't adjusting, she was planning. Within a week, she started sending notes. Not friendly ones, but typed-out letters that looked official, citing fictional HOA guidelines and demanding I bring the property up to code. Code? Whose code? Certainly not mine. She didn't understand that my land wasn't part of her little kingdom, but she acted like it was. And no matter how many times I explained it, she didn't care. To her, I was an eyesore, an obstacle, something that didn't fit into her perfect vision of the neighborhood. It didn't take long for her to shift from annoying to aggressive. One morning, I found a bright yellow envelope duct-taped to my gate. Inside was a formal-looking notice on fake HOA letterhead demanding that I remove all livestock within 30 days or face legal action. The problem? I wasn't even in the HOA. My property had never been part of the development, and I had the deeds and zoning paperwork to prove it. Still, she pressed on like she had the authority of a sheriff in an old western. She began leaving more of those letters, each one more threatening than the last, warning of supposed fines, citations, and lawsuits if I didn't comply with community standards. When I ignored the nonsense, she escalated. I started getting calls from county officials who'd received complaints about my land. One day it was about alleged zoning violations. The next it was accusations of animal cruelty. Then came a surprise visit from the health department. Each time they walked the property, scratched their heads, and left with a shrug and an apology. My paperwork was solid, my animals were healthy, my land was well kept, but the sheer volume of complaints was becoming a problem in itself. She even tried to weaponize the noise ordinance, complaining about the sound of roosters at dawn and horses whinnying too loudly. I reminded her, politely, that she had moved next to a ranch. She didn't like that answer. Apparently she expected rural silence and Pinterest-worthy scenery, not the working heartbeat of a real homestead. She wasn't just trying to make a point. She was trying to wear me down, one paper, one call, one complaint at a time. She was playing the long game, hoping I'd give up, pack up, and sell. But she was about to learn just how stubborn a rancher can be. It wasn't enough for her to send letters and make phone calls. When that didn't push me off the land, she decided to hit where it hurt most: my wallet. I started noticing delays in my regular deliveries. My feed supplier, who had never missed a drop-off in 3 years, suddenly became evasive. When I finally got him on the phone, he admitted that someone claiming to be from a regulatory board had called to report unsanitary conditions at my ranch. False, of course, but enough to spook him. He agreed to keep delivering, but with new restrictions and inspections. It was the beginning of a domino effect. Next, the local veterinarian who checked on my animals every few months suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. Turns out she'd received an anonymous tip about dangerous animals on my property and didn't want the hassle. Parents from the 4-H group that brought their kids for riding lessons started pulling out, saying they were concerned about recent complaints. Karen was poisoning the well, spreading rumors, filing anonymous reports, and trying to turn my peaceful little business into a battleground. She even went so far as to send letters to a few of my private clients, the ones who bought eggs, goat's milk, and handmade goods from me. The letters weren't outright threats, but they were laced with subtle warnings about my compliance issues and suggested they find safer sources. It was the kind of sabotage that doesn't leave fingerprints, just doubt and inconvenience. And it worked, for a little while. I watched my income dip and my relationships strain under the weight of her relentless interference. But instead of folding, I doubled down. I knew she wasn't going to stop. She wanted me gone, and she thought choking off my livelihood would force my hand. What she didn't know was, I had other hands to play. After weeks of silent warfare, I decided to try something different, talk to her face to face. Maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding fueled by bad assumptions and a little too much free time. I walked over one afternoon, unarmed except for a cup of coffee in one hand and hope in the other. She answered the door wearing that same tight smile, her arms crossed, her body language already screaming disapproval before I even spoke. I kept my tone calm and respectful. I explained that my property wasn't under the HOA's jurisdiction, that I followed all county laws, and that I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I told her I wanted to live in peace, just like everyone else. She didn't even let me finish. "If you want peace," she snapped, "then you'll remove the animals and clean up that eyesore of a barn. This isn't the Wild West." Her voice was cold, sharp. "People moved out here for quiet, for class, not for whatever this is." She waved a hand toward my land like it was something dirty stuck to her shoe. I stared at her for a moment, genuinely stunned. There was no compromise in her voice, no hint of understanding, only contempt, like she'd already decided I didn't belong here. I nodded, took a slow sip of my coffee, and turned to walk away. That was the last time I tried to reason with her. I realized then she didn't want peace, she wanted control, and I wasn't about to hand it over. After our brief and bitter conversation, Karen shifted from passive-aggressive to outright intrusive. It started with more official-looking envelopes, this time not just taped to my gate, but mailed with return addresses that mimicked county departments. Of course they were fake, bad copies with typos and no legal weight, but the effort she put into making them look legitimate was disturbing. When that didn't rattle me, she turned to tech. One morning, I heard a faint buzzing overhead while feeding the goats. Looking up, I spotted a drone hovering above my pasture, slowly scanning my land like it was on a reconnaissance mission. It wasn't the county. It wasn't a hobbyist. It was Karen. I caught her standing behind her fence with a phone in hand, watching through the screen like she was a director filming some exposé. I reported the drone to the sheriff's office, but they couldn't do much, airspace laws being what they are. She was clever, staying just on the legal edge of harassment, always a step away from being caught red-handed. Then came the flood of calls to enforcement agencies. Animal control showed up again, then code enforcement, then some zoning official asking if I was running an unlicensed business. Each visit ended the same. They checked everything, found nothing wrong, and left with embarrassed apologies. But it was clear she was trying to build a case, brick by brick, one false claim at a time. She even rallied some HOA members to draft a petition claiming my presence devalued their properties, despite the fact that my ranch predated the HOA itself. They held neighborhood meetings without inviting me, circulating whispers and feeding off each other's paranoia. But she didn't want justice. She wanted me boxed in, outnumbered, and exhausted. What she didn't realize was, I wasn't the one being cornered. She was. I remember the exact moment I decided enough was enough. I was standing by the fence, watching her pace around her backyard on the phone, pointing at my property like she was surveying enemy territory. I had just wrapped up another useless visit from a county inspector who looked more annoyed at being dragged out there than anything else. My animals were fine, my papers were in order. But I was tired of the games, the pressure, the constant need to defend what was already rightfully mine. That night, I sat down with every document I had, zoning maps, land use codes, property rights. I called my lawyer. We went over everything in detail, line by line. Turns out my land was zoned for agricultural use and recreational development. Not only was I fully within my rights, but there were things I could do that she hadn't even considered. That's when the idea hit me. If she wanted to make life difficult, if she wanted to push and prod and escalate, then maybe it was time I gave her something to really complain about. Not out of spite, but out of principle. She wanted noise? I'd give her noise. She wanted to wage a war of paperwork and pressure. I'd answer with precision and law. Her game was over. Mine had just begun. The plan came together faster than I expected. I wasn't building a revenge scheme. I was building a reminder that I had every right to be here and that I wasn't going anywhere. After confirming the legal boundaries with my lawyer, I started sketching out a small private gun range right along the border of my land, facing the HOA line, just within earshot of Karen's pristine back porch. It would be fully legal, safely constructed, and well within the rights granted to me by local zoning regulations. I wasn't cutting corners. I was making a point, loud and clear. I ordered backstops, steel targets, safety berms, and all the required signage. I brought in a certified range consultant to ensure it met every safety standard. I didn't want drama. I wanted legitimacy. When the permits were filed and the materials delivered, I saw her standing behind her curtains, phone in hand, probably already dialing someone. The structure took less than 2 weeks to finish. By the time the last target was bolted into place, I had invited a few of my veteran buddies over for a little weekend celebration. We weren't reckless. We followed every safety protocol, stuck to daylight hours, and respected decibel limits. But there was no mistaking the sound of gunfire rolling across the hill and echoing through her manicured neighborhood. She came storming over once, screaming about noise and threats and aggression. I calmly handed her a copy of the law and let her know it was an officially registered recreational range on private land. She turned red, sputtered something about calling the mayor, and stomped away. She wanted control. What she got instead was the sound of my freedom, echoing off every wall she tried to build between us. From the moment the first shot rang out, Karen completely unraveled. The very next day, I saw her pacing her yard with a noise meter, pointing it toward my range like she was conducting a science experiment. Then came the calls, first to the sheriff, then to the county, and eventually to what she claimed was a personal contact in state government. The deputies showed up, checked the paperwork, inspected the range, and left with a nod and a chuckle. Everything was up to code, perfectly legal, and impeccably documented. She didn't take the news well. She filed a formal noise complaint with the county. I already knew the decibel limit and had installed soundproofing berms and baffling facing my side. But the echo from the open direction, hers, wasn't illegal. It was just inconvenient. She even hired an attorney to try and sue me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, but the case didn't make it past the first review. The judge tossed it out, citing my legal rights and her history of complaints as evidence of harassment, not victimhood. Then the cracks started forming on her own side. Her HOA board, which had mostly humoured her antics, began getting backlash from other homeowners. They were tired of her dragging the neighbourhood into a personal feud. One neighbour even stopped by my gate with a six-pack and said, "About time someone stood up to her." Karen stopped waving her phone. She stopped the letters. Eventually, she stopped going outside altogether. The noise she tried so hard to suppress had become her soundtrack. But this wasn't about torment. It was about standing ground. She wanted silence, control, and obedience. What she got was a community that had grown tired of her nonsense, and a rancher who'd had enough. 6 months later, the for sale sign appeared on her perfectly trimmed front lawn. No open house, no balloons, no friendly realtor meet and greet, just a plain sign and a desperate attempt to escape the mess she'd created. Rumour had it she listed the house well below market value, hoping for a quick exit. But word travels fast in a small community. People talk, and buyers listen. Every time someone came to view the property, they'd inevitably hear the faint pop, pop, pop from the range and ask questions, and someone, somewhere, would always be around to tell the story. She tried everything, slashing the price, repainting, even advertising it as a quiet retreat. But there's nothing quiet about picking a fight with the one neighbour who actually knows how to defend himself with more than just words. After months of no bites, she finally managed to sell, at a loss. And just like that, she vanished. No goodbye, no apologies, just gone. The day the moving truck pulled out of her driveway, I stood by my fence with a fresh cup of coffee and watched her SUV disappear down the road. The silence that followed wasn't just peaceful. It was earned. My ranch was mine again. The animals were thriving, the deliveries had resumed, and the sound of gunfire faded back into the background, only returning on weekends with friends and laughter. Karen had tried to starve me out, to crush my spirit and run me off my land, but in the end she ran, and I stayed. Some battles aren't fought with fists or fury. They're fought with patience, persistence, and a deep understanding of what's rightfully yours. I never wanted a war. I didn't move out here to pick fights or prove a point. I came for peace, for space, for a life rooted in something real. But when someone tries to take that from you, when they mistake your silence for weakness, you have a choice: bend or stand tall. I chose to stand. Not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with resolve. Karen tried to push me off the land I poured my soul into. She underestimated how deeply rooted I was. She saw a problem where there was none, and in trying to erase me, she erased herself. Now the ranch is calm again. The animals are fed. The porch is quiet, and every Saturday the echo of freedom still rings, just loud enough to remember.